You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next half an hour or so, we are going to be talking some Doctor Who news. I say news, it's not really news, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm Matt.
I'm Dylan.
I'm Ian.
And I'm John.
So it's the start of January. There's not really a lot of news yet because the news cycle hasn't started picking up on what the episodes are going to be, who's going to have written them, and all this kind of stuff for Ncuti Gatwa's first series, which of course is in May. We've mentioned that it's coming at us a little bit later than we might reasonably expected. I think the smart thinking is that May the 18th to July the 6th might be the dates because of where they fall in the American calendar as well. And we've got to consider that Disney were probably fairly responsible for this decision, seeing as the BBC and Russell T Davies always seem to prefer the sort of May bank holiday, or the Easter bank holiday rather, weekend for the broadcast dates. So that's not happening. So there are a few things coming over from the Christmas broadcast that we can talk about, and there are a few things going forwards that we can mention, and I just thought I'd bring some of these things up just to start some shorter conversations. One of the things was that we've not spoken about is that there were interviews with Ncuti Gatwa and with Millie Gibson in which people are now taking, oh, they might be leaving after the second series and they might both be two and done. I think in our private conversation, the sort of conclusion that we drew from what was said was that Millie Gibson is doing 2 years and then she'll be moving on because she spoke about looking for new acting jobs in an ongoing kind of a sense. Whereas the Ncuti Gatwa comment was more like, these are my 3 downtime months between series or whatever. So maybe I'm looking for some theatre work in between finishing the second series and coming back for the third. Any thoughts from anybody? And would Ncuti Gatwa staying on and having a new companion and Millie Gibson leaving, that's kind of standard, isn't it? Is that kind of what we would expect?
Well, yeah, it seems as RTD seems to be not doing an awful lot new in terms of how I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but it's all been quite RTD by numbers so far, and that was sort of the way things ran, have tended to sort of run. I think it wouldn't surprise me if he was doing a Rose again, and I think, you know, yeah, I mean, Ncuti's got downtime in between seasons, so it makes sense that he's going to do other stuff. Or alternatively, you know, maybe we're getting a gap here with a spin-off that maybe we'll talk about in a bit, that, you know, that will take the place of Doctor Who. I think just because Doctor Who's going to be on regularly, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the main show.
Well, this was one suggestion that I'd seen, was that one of the reasons, or a side effect of David Tennant still being around, is that they could have 2 series with Ncuti Gatwa, then a series of what David Tennant's Doctor's getting up to, and then go back to Ncuti Gatwa again. In much the same way, I noticed, as you had 2 annual series of The Mandalorian and then a series of Boba Fett, and then you came back to another series of Mandalorian, and the Boba Fett series seemed to be a sort of stand-in series for the 3rd series of Mandalorian to a certain degree, even down to having lots of the same characters in, didn't it? So I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Everybody's just sort of staring at me.
Yes, and it moved the story on as well, I think. Just thinking about, you know, the idea that Ncuti might be doing 2 seasons and then potentially might be going. We've got this kind of like law that a doctor should do 3 years, and I don't think 3 years is very long. You know, we're coming up to the 20th anniversary, and we've got through 6 or 7 doctors in that time, and it's like if everyone could sign up for, you know, 4, 5 series.
This kind of suggests, so if he's doing 2 seasons and he's out, then obviously he's not doing 3 seasons, so that breaks it. If he's coming back, then presumably there'll be a contract. Would it be a rolling contract per year after 2 years, or would he sign up for another 2 years? In which case it would be out.
I think usually they've optioned them for you do the first season with an option for 2 more, and then you have to negotiate further. Although I don't know whether that was quite as clear cut with Matt Smith, or was it the third season? Because he was supposed to stick around for a fourth, I think.
He was supposed to do a fourth, and it didn't happen.
Was it a third with an option or something like that?
Maybe. I don't. I'm not.
And
I'm
also
not sure.
now we have this slightly different model where they sort of film 2 seasons at once. So maybe he comes back and he spends 2 calendar years producing what will be 4 years worth of TV. So maybe that's going to be a difference going forward.
Who knows? The thing we've got to remember, of course, is that times have changed. Back in the original series, they tended to cast as the Doctor character actors who were either past their best to some degree, or at least, well, when I say past their best, what I mean is they were past the point at which they were ever going to turn into film stars.
They were never going to be Bond.
Yeah, they tended to be actors into middle age who were.
There comes an age in an actor's life when you know you will never play the Dane.
I will never play.
Poor Peter Davison hitting that point before he hits 30 as well.
Well, but this is what I was coming to. In the modern series, Doctor Who's actually a launching point for a career, right? So the only one who's not been early in their career has been Peter Capaldi. All of the others have been at the start of a career where they go on to do bigger and better paid things afterwards, or at least that's the idea. So none of them are gonna stick around for 5 years, are they? Because they're going to be getting offers to do other things long before that point gets reached. And the thing is,
I think you're wrong, Bill. Eccleston was made when he
fairly
came in.
established, but he still went on and did a lot of other stuff afterwards. Yeah, you're right. Eccleston was the one who brought it back, but from the point where David Tennant became the Doctor, that became the model.
It made stars.
Yeah, it's a star maker. And what was I about to say? Just kind of and the other thing is they might each have done 3 series. So Tennant and Smith and Capaldi and Whittaker each did 3 series, but they each actually played the Doctor for 4 years because those 3 series came an average of 18 months apart. So there were
There's
actually
specials in there, aren't there? So it's a different model from what we used to think of as just straight blocks all the way through.
Exactly. So 3 series is basically a sort of 4.5 year to 5 year plan anyway. You probably do it in 4 years and it's broadcast over 4.5 years. It's kind of how it works.
I guess Dylan has a point because it's partly to do with Russell T Davies changing the model of how he's making Doctor Who. It's a bit like Barry Letts coming in as producer and shooting everything out of order to avoid, where possible, the war games situation of writing episodes the week before they're aired. Whereas Russell T Davies is now producing episodes sort of 18 months to 2 years before they're shown on the television.
Yeah.
But there is a slight misconception about this because they didn't just do 2 series back to back. They finished filming the first series in July of last year and then came back in November. So there was still a 3-month gap in between.
Yeah, but they are like banking them basically.
No,
they're just making it ahead of time, aren't they?
I mean, I guess it's whether we get a gap year in 2 years or 3 years or whatever will dictate sort of how that works. The thing that interests me is that it always seems to take 9 months to make a series of Doctor Who, whether you're doing 10 episodes, 9 episodes, 13 episodes, 14 or 12. It's quite a... So, I mean, that says to me potentially that the new series might be nearer hour-long episodes. I don't know. I'm just sort of guessing there, but I can't see... I can't see how it's taking them that... Based on the quality of production we've had so far, I can't see... Yeah,
fully in agreement, Dylan.
Yeah. I don't want to get back into slagging off new Doctor Who.
You haven't seen the rest of my list.
But yeah, I mean, I wonder. I do wonder whether perhaps whether the reason it's still 9 months is that they're hour-long episodes, 9-hour-long episodes, including a Christmas special. But
that makes sense because before this, you were told 45-minute episodes sold quite nicely to networks. This, when it's on a streamer, you don't have to worry about how long the episodes are. You're just selling it. You can.
That's true. They have said, it has been pointed out that it takes longer to make Doctor Who than it used to. And so, yeah, you've gone from 13 to 12 to 10 and now to 9, and it's still taking exactly the same amount of time.
Is that the length of episode though? Because
well, that's what I was about to say. I don't.
Sorry.
Well, that was going to be my point. I don't think it's about the length of episode. I don't think it's about how much you get in the can against how long you've taken to get that amount in the can. I think it's about the amount of time they spend just setting stuff up and just doing stuff. They seem to be spending longer doing stuff. And COVID is also partly responsible for this too. I don't know, Dylan, has COVID had any impact on filming?
It's really difficult having a TV insider on the podcast, because normally we just talk bullshit and it's fine. But now we talk bullshit and we have to go, Dylan.
We're all looking at Dylan's
Is that
face
all right?
here going, oops.
COVID didn't really have any impact, and actually within about 2 months of everything going back, everything was still moving at the same pace as it used to, just with people in masks. So my presumption would be they are spending longer doing it because it's either more technically challenging, so they need more time, or that they are shooting longer episodes. But I don't, for instance, Wild Blue Yonder and Ascension of the Cybermen, I don't see them being one of those being particularly more technically challenging than the other, if that makes sense. And yet one of them was shot in 3 weeks and one of them was shot in a month. So, I mean...
Well, then here's another thing that was on my list, but I'll bring it up now. You've got all this extra money, and yet for the past few years, before Russell T Davies come back, Doctor Who was going to Spain, and it was going to South Africa, and it was going to Estonia, and it was going to all sorts of other places. It was going around the globe in order to use those locations for alien planets or for the Earth in the past and all these other kind of things. Doctor Who was starting to look pretty exotic. Russell T Davies has come back, and it's back to everything's in Cardiff or within a 5-mile drive. That's also, I mean, the point I was making with the money is, how come they've got all this extra money? Where is it going? Why is it not going on making things look more exotic when that's something that they easily could do? But also, I guess it's part of the production now. If you can do everything within 5 miles, you're saving time as well.
You're saving time and money, yeah.
We don't know how the money spread. It's,
is it
spread across the whole course of the deal, so it's only a few extra quid per episode? We don't know. Don't know how long's Disney's deal? Anyone know?
From what I understand, it was for the specials and for 2 series of Doctor Who. Is now I thought it was for the specials of 1 series, but judging by the amount of money I've been told they've got, I can't see how that would translate to 1 series. And considering they're making the 2nd series before the first one's been broadcast, that must be the deal. With presumably, if this spin-off thing is happening that they seem to have set up a company for, then presumably they're very confident and it's doing good numbers on Disney, so there's no reason why that deal should end. But if it doesn't, it could be 2 seasons and then move on to another streamer somewhere else. Like, it may not be the permanent home of Doctor Who.
Well, this is the thing. The Doctor Who in the States has been moving from one streamer to another every 2 or 3 years for ages now. It was on Amazon Prime for a bit. It was on Netflix in the States for a bit. It was on HBO Max for a bit.
It's still on Max at the moment.
Is it?
But,
yeah.
But I understand it's moving quite soon.
This is unfortunate, because normally we just talk bullshit about how Doctor Who's shown in America. But now we've got Ian Martin here, so we have to defer to him. And is that right, Ian? Is it right?
I'm like the US correspondent. I'm John Sopel.
So we've got a US correspondent, an industry insider, and John, who talks football, right? You're the football insider.
and a bullshitter, yes, that's fine.
We've got that guy that writes about the demons as well, though. Wrote a book on the demons, right?
The guy's running one black archive.
Yeah, but it was a good one.
Wow.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right.
Differently from
Viewing figures.
Anyone got any Hitman numbers?
the viewing figures came out. The 28-day figures came out for the Star Beast, and they were significantly lower than people's expectations had been driven to believe. But then the 7-day figures were significantly lower than kind of something weird happened. And I don't know why it happened or how it happened quite, but you could, I mean, from my perspective, you could see it happening. So when the overnights came out for the Star Beast, I think it was Jane Tranter said in an interview, oh, and 2 million people watched it the next day, and 1 million people have watched it every day subsequent to that. And you're thinking, Christ, if that's actually true, the 7-day figure is going to be up around 10 or 12 million. And then they said there's an extra 3 million on top of that from 7 days to 28 days. And I'm thinking, God, normally it's about 500,000 between 7 days and 28 days. 3 million's an incredible figure. And on both occasions, it turned out they were talking about people who watching things repeat viewings. And when you fill those numbers out, so you get the actual number of unique eyes on Doctor Who, the actual numbers were a lot lower than people had been saying, which is interesting in that for most people, the conversation is only about the projected figures that people were bandying about before the actual figures turned up. And when the actual figures turn up, a few people talk about it on a forum or might mention it in passing on podcasts like this, but that's quickly forgotten about. And as far as the general public is concerned, they heard Jane Tranter on an interview on the radio talking about how it was going to be 12 million. It's less important anymore anyway. But I mean, we do still report and take notice of these things, don't we? Is it important beyond these circles? And if so, why? Because I suppose it is about the publicity in the end, isn't it?
It's not that important, is it? Because we know Doctor Who's future is secure for what, another 2-3 years? So, you know,
well, 1.5 by the sound of it.
That's it.
It still did pretty well, didn't it? I mean, you know, Gladiators
it did pretty well.
Gladiators was just on, and that got phenomenal numbers, and they were really happy. And that wasn't, you know, that was sort of Dragonfire numbers rather than City of Death numbers. But it's still, you know, it was still plugged to be phenomenal.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Go.
I was just going to say that I think that the people who think the ratings are bad will always think the ratings are bad, and the people who think the ratings are good will always think the ratings are good. It depends on your agenda. Ultimately, the BBC and Disney are making this product that they're going to sell again and again and again, not just through streaming platforms, but through other avenues of Blu-ray sales. And we may say, oh, it's only going to be on Disney now, but it may leave Disney at some point, and at which point they'll want to sell that product on in some way, shape, or form. So the only Doctor Who's only in trouble when it starts to disappear and starts to be less of an interesting brand. But I think Doctor Who continues to bring in money and viewing figures, and so we're in a good place. Whether you love it or loathe it, people are tuning in and spending their money on the brand.
And when you think it's been around 60 years and we've had, 14 or 15 Doctors at this point, and it's been through some really sort of challenging eras, and it seems like it's survived everything, so it's probably never going away. That was hubristic. I shouldn't have said that. But
no, I don't think it is ever going away. I think
how would you kill it off?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a TV equivalent of a shark. It's perfect developed. You don't need a new lead actor.
Or
it's the
equivalent of Sherlock Holmes. You don't talk about, they're going to kill Sherlock. Well, Conan Doyle did, but you're going to. That's it for Sherlock Holmes. There's never going to be another Sherlock. That's the end of Sherlock Holmes. Because that's ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense. They're talking now about another adaptation of Sherlock Holmes.
Well, that's it. You never talk about the end of Sherlock Holmes because, at the end of, say, for instance, the Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss version, nobody said, oh, it's finished. People said, oh, there'll be another season as and when we can. But you talk about Sherlock Holmes starting with a new actor. You don't talk about finishing with the old actor. And to be honest, in Doctor Who, we have a conversation because there is a handing over point. But the conversation is always more exciting and always a lot more sort of energetic when you're talking about who might the next one be. Then, how long exactly is the last one going to be around for?
Well, this is a question that always comes up, isn't it? As soon as they come in, how long are you going to do?
Yeah, but
it's basically
and it's
triggers
where we
Vroom as a
started
TV
today,
show.
so.
Yeah.
But as soon as you hear who the next Doctor Who is going to be, your next automatic thought is not how long are they going to do, but who's going to be the one after them.
It's going to be what they're going to wear, isn't it?
But the other thing I think is part of this conversation, and the reason why this popped into my head was I caught up this week on a couple of editions of the About Time books that I realised I hadn't got around to buying. So these are the Tatwood books that, and it struck me because having read the sort of first, God knows how many volumes, 6, 7 volumes before, there's something about American criticism of Doctor Who that I think kind of misses the point of what Doctor Who is for.
You know that was British, don't you?
Well, no, it's not the Britishness. It's about the fact that in America, they watch it as essentially the same program from start to finish. But I think in Britain, every time you get a new producer, a new doctor, a new time slot, a new whatever, a new showrunner, that person and the corporation and the actors repurpose the series so that it is by and for somebody else. And I think this has been happening the entire time. If you look at Doctor Who in 1963, it's very Reithian, it's very educational, it fulfills a certain premise, and the premise is telling kids things that they might not necessarily be interested to hear about in a way that will make them interested to hear about it. By the time you get to Patrick Troughton, it is opposite the ITC serials, and it's doing the ITC thing of Monster of the Week, which is not what it was doing when William Hartnell was the Doctor. When you get to John Pertwee, they repurpose it again in a sort of post-ITC world where they're making something that is slightly akin to ITC and Bond, but is already moving into the area that I already talk about, where it's about something exotic on a Saturday tea time that's a bit more than the ITC. It's ITC with a big orange tentacled monster, and the orange tentacled monster is kind of the identifying part of it. You move to Tom Baker. You move to Tom Baker, and Doctor Who goes back into space, and it becomes literally like one of these sort of programs that Michael Palin or somebody would do, or David Attenborough, where they take you to weird parts of the planet Earth where you're just looking at the pictures on the screen and thinking, how on earth is that on the same planet that I am? Doctor Who is sort of fulfilling that same gap by showing you things you've never seen before. Do you see what I mean? I'm only 4 Doctors in, and already Doctor Who has been used for 4 entirely different purposes that are entirely different to one another already. And the point I'm coming to is when you come to the conversation about viewing figures, people are always comparing Doctor Who's viewing figures with viewing figures from elsewhere in Doctor Who. That's entirely the wrong way to look at Doctor Who's viewing figures. And it's not even about the whole of TV's viewing figures are changing, so we have to factor that into our conversation. It's about the fact that when Doctor Who was on Sunday night, its viewing figures were in competition with other programmes on Sunday night. They weren't in competition with the programmes that were on a Saturday night. Now it's back on Saturdays. They're not in competition with the programmes that are on Sunday nights anymore. Now they're back into competition with other programs that are on Saturday nights. That's an entirely different conversation. And so you don't compare the David Tennant 14th Doctor viewing figures with the Jodie Whittaker figures or the Peter Capaldi figures. You compare them with what Gladiators is doing this week. And so, Matt, how did David Tennant compare with Gladiators? Pretty well, I'd have thought, judging by what you were saying, right?
A little bit more than Gladiators, I think, or comparable.
Well, it's
so there you go.
The star power of, Bradley Walsh.
But you know what I mean? My entire point is people have got to stop thinking of Doctor Who as one entire whole where all the parts of it are comparable to all the other parts.
So I agree that you don't compare viewing figures on a Sunday night to a Saturday night. Where I find it harder to agree with is the view that Doctor Who on a Sunday night is a different entity from Doctor Who on a Saturday night. I think Doctor Who under Chibnall is a different entity than under RTD. I don't think there's a Sunday nightness that changes the shape of Doctor Who. I don't think it's written to be on Sunday night. I think Doctor Who is, in a sense, they're trying to create drama. That's the overarching thing, comedy drama.
I don't think that's true. I think if you look at even Stephen Moffat and Russell T Davies is writing a show to be watched by a big audience on a Saturday night, in amongst all the glitzy stuff that's going on a Saturday. It's not even drama, it's glitz. And then Stephen Moffat writes something that is meant to be watched as part of a box set experience. They both write Doctor Who in a very different way from each other for a different audience.
Yeah, I agree to that. I don't agree it's to a different audience. I think it's always intended to be towards as general an audience as possible.
Didn't RTD say that actually something like the portion of Doctor Who viewers that actually return week on, week out is something like 10% of the audience, which presumably is us lot, and then the rest is just random people tuning in because it's on?
Fundamentally, because it's an anthology series.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that's actually all that true, because to get 8 million people each week and only 10% of them be the same 8 million people as the week before, seems a bit odd.
This was when he was first in charge, but I remember thinking it was weird at the time. But then, RTD's on the cell, isn't he? I mean, I think then this perhaps is changing to get people back. I think you do longer stories and have great. Like, one of my biggest worries is that the Doctor Who will continue as an anthology series, and people will just fall out of love with it if you don't have a hook to have people keep coming back every week. That is my biggest fear for Doctor Who.
But it's good because we've got Mavity.
Yeah, we do. And everybody's got gloves they can put on, haven't they? Those gloves, the Mavity gloves.
They'd be defying Mavity, yeah.
I'll tell you one great thing about the return of David Tennant that I hadn't really pegged until it thought struck me was, and this is changing the subject entirely, but I was listening to an old podcast that I hadn't caught up with. Not that old, I don't think, but relatively old. And they touched on the discussion of the Not My Doctor thing, and how people had said at the end of Peter Capaldi, right, that's my cutoff point. I don't consider anything after this point Doctor Who. And I thought, well, you have to now because David Tennant came back, right? And you can't not consider that Doctor Who. So by having David Tennant and Catherine Tate come back and talking about sort of Jodie Whittaker's and things that had happened in the story during that time, but even if they hadn't, by having David Tennant come back after Jodie Whittaker, that means that all those people who said, no, it's my cutoff point, I don't consider this Doctor Who anymore, no longer have that pedestal to sort of sit themselves on, do they?
Well, now because they say it's not just that it was Jodie Whittaker and it was a woman, they say it's because it's too woke and there's a woke agenda, which is very much present in the RTD era. They're the sort of people that complain about the Newton casting and stuff like that. And no, was it Isaac Newton? Is that right?
Yeah. It's like they didn't watch the first RTD era.
No, true. But do you know what I mean? They can't do that. I'm cutting it off here thing.
But if they're prepared to never watch any of Jodie's 3 series, they can probably quite easily not watch the 3 David Tennant specials either. So they're probably fine in their.
And we all know they
They become professional Doctor Who unviewers.
So Dylan was about to say, we all know they actually do watch them. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Ian Levine stood there and said, I'm never watching Doctor Who again, it's dead. And then tweeted about every fucking episode every week.
See, I don't. Did anyone see Pointless tonight? I know.
Yes.
Yes, it had a category on the end, the Jodie Whittaker of Doctor Who. And, pointless categories were the cast of Power of the Doctor, right, or any episode title from Jodie Whittaker. I like to think that all 100 were Doctor Who fans and not my doctors, because no one could name a single Jodie title.
I mean, if you'd have asked that question of any era of Doctor Who, you'd have been unlikely to find somebody in a sort of random selection of 100 people who could name a Peter Capaldi story or a Tom Baker story. That was such a bizarre question.
Hardly anyone named one for the old series, for classics.
It's the one with the maggots, the one with the stone statues.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't like Friends titles.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite. What a
And yet we
strange
could
question.
quite happily just reel off all of them without
Yeah,
even
yeah.
thinking about it. What's
Yeah.
wrong with us?
That's the next episode of this podcast, isn't it?
Yeah, I hope so.
In fact, didn't
I've
we do
wasted
that
my
once in a
life.
library?
We did it once in the library.
Yeah, we just pretty much went through every story trying to remember what. Yeah. And
Well,
then we
I
missed one.
tried to remember what all the stories were in order, and you guys, you each had in a rotation 60 seconds to talk about. It was an anniversary episode. Or
I
something.
heard this, and you forgot one story or something.
Yes,
So
yeah,
you had to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
JR forgot a story.
I think it was the next Doctor. I think I skipped a special when I got to RTD specials. Yeah,
I'd have skipped that as well.
Oh,
I
no,
got a couple-
someone got me to do in work one of the online quizzes where you just go name every Doctor Who episode in whatever it was, 20 minutes.
Oh,
Boom, right
lovely.
through.
Easy.
Yeah, easy, right through.
Yeah.
Boom. None
Did
of
you
these
win
missing
anything?
specials. The undying respect of my colleagues. Or
I'd
was
have
it
wanted-
derision? One of the two.
I'd have wanted some crisps at least.
Yeah, I was hoping for some.
Yeah.
They bought me a pint afterwards, so that was fun.
Oh, you can't argue with that.
Oh, I bet they did.
Sorry, JR, did you have a podcast you wanted us to do?
Not especially now. I've got a couple more things to bring up, but I mean these are minor things. One thing I noticed is I've been catching up on some podcast listening, and another thing I noticed was lots of conversations about who Mrs. Flood's going to turn out to be, and people were predicting that okay, she's probably not somebody like Rani or Susan. She might be the Rani or Susan, but she's probably not, and she's probably not Romana or whatever. But everybody was saying, but she's somebody who will turn out to have met the Doctor before, probably off screen. And I'm thinking, no, she didn't recognize the Doctor. She didn't recognize the blue box. She recognized the fact that it was a TARDIS. So she's somebody who knows what Time Lords are and who has never heard of the Doctor. Surely.
She's recognised as a specific TARDIS because not all TARDISes look like police boxes, JR. I don't know if
No,
you've seen
she
this
recognizes
show.
the sound when it disappears. It dematerializes in front of her, and it's when it dematerializes that she recognizes it's a TARDIS. Therefore, she recognizes that a dematerializing thing is a TARDIS, not the fact that it's a blue box that dematerializes.
But it only
Otherwise,
makes
she'd
that
have
noise
realized
because he
it
leaves the
was a
handbrake
TARDIS.
on, so it is his TARDIS. So she does know the Doctor specifically.
Well, you're expecting Russell T Davies to keep everything from continuity, right?
Well, the one I've seen is that Flood, so rain, so an anagram of rain is Rani, so that's
Yeah, yeah.
probably your answer, and that's
Flood,
you know.
river song.
Pond.
lovely.
Yeah. But I think the point is, okay, so Russell
Flood,
T Davies.
Gerald Flood.
Yes.
Comedian. Yeah.
Oh, that would be amazing.
It's Chameleon! Come
It's
on.
Comedian's wife. It's Mrs. Flood. I mean, this is Russell T Davies, so he could use RTD logic and it could turn out to be Susan. But as things stand, I think it has to be somebody who doesn't know who the Doctor is, but just recognises what Time Lords are. That
Or
seems
someone that doesn't recognise this incarnation of the Doctor.
Well, maybe, but still she didn't recognise the blue box that mysteriously appeared in two different places in the street.
Or was she putting it on?
Yeah, she could have been like.
I mean, my main thing is I don't particularly like Anith Dobson, so I'd be quite happy if she didn't come back, please.
Yeah.
Or
On the
she did
point of
bring back
on the
Brian
point of-
May and he could do his Badger
Yeah.
song.
On the point of is she putting it on though? She's only talking to the same character, and the first two times she's saying, "What's this blue box all about?" And the third time is also to the same character with nobody else around, with no reason not to be putting it on anymore. So why she suddenly turns to the camera and says, "Oh, it's a TARDIS." Do you know what I mean? The logic suggests.
Because it was a first draft script.
Or
It was a
she's
second. There was a
she's-
note given.
Yeah.
or she's Millie Gibson's mother, and there's going to be extra scenes from the depositing of Millie Gibson's baby form, in which she then has an interaction with the Doctor. So she wouldn't have known about TARDISes until after the Doctor goes back in time to witness Millie Gibson getting left off, and then that happens. So that creates the new Mrs. Flood in the modern times. And that
I'm gonna have
joins
to.
the
Can you
Doctor.
say that again slowly? I'm gonna have to write it down.
No, Stephen Moffat did it nearly every week. So just write down the word Stephen and the word Moffat, and you'll be set.
Lovely.
Tiny
Okay.
Wimey.
Two more tiny things. Well, one's not such a tiny thing. Russell T Davies has this weird thing about optics, doesn't he? So he does things for the optics sometimes, like recasting Davros as an able-bodied person, and that's a very deliberate choice for the optics, which is fine, and the optics on that are good. But then he'll do weird things, like he has had in these last few episodes. All this basically trans rep, right? So there's a lot of stuff in the last few episodes that is kind of positive promotion of trans people, which I am very much on board with that. Except, and this goes back to the sort of David Tennant not doing the Jodie Whittaker clothes and doing the sort of magic transformation where the clothes transform too. Russell T Davies is all about trans rep, as long as it's male born trans rep. But there's no female born trans rep. And there's no decent female gay representation in his episodes either. In fact, from the entire first RTD run, the only female gay characters I think we meet are two cats who are just shown in a S&M sketch for 30 seconds in one of the cars. I'm trying to think.
Sky Sylvester Midnight.
John's the ex.
Well, that's not positive rep, is it?
So this is the problem when we do a podcast. We talk a load of bullshit, but now we've got John who knows all about lesbianism in Doctor Who. So we have to defer to him every time.
But Sky's partner's not there. What I mean is there's a difference between on-screen representation and just saying something.
There are two women in Gridlocked as well, aren't there? The older women.
That's
who,
what
he calls the sisters.
Yeah.
But I take your point, and who knows what this series holds for the lesbians of Doctor Who, which is coming soon for Big Finish. But
all we've really seen is that there are going to be sort of more male-born trans characters, aren't we? I don't know what the expression that you're supposed to use is, but male-born trans is what I'm going with for this, which is good. And I'm glad to see all those characters, but I kind of wish there was a balance and we'd see characters in the other direction too.
Yeah.
It feels like he's doing the rep, but he's kind of got this single-minded vision of what that rep needs to be.
It's probably he's writing it essentially on his experiences, within his own worldview, and his worldview is particularly the gay experience, not the lesbian one. Yeah.
And that's what I mean. I wish he would just broaden those horizons a bit so that everybody is part of this thing rather than just the kind of the people that he represents. I just wish he'd be a bit broader with it.
Yeah, we should start a campaign on Twitter.
RTD's not woke enough.
JR calls for more lesbians on Doctor Who. He needs it now.
No more female-born trans is what I want to see. The only time we've ever
I'm not going to write
seen
that on Twitter just in case it's the wrong.
That's been cancelled.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? The only time we've ever seen that, I think, is Sleep No More. I'm trying to think of other examples, but I can't. And even in Sleep No More, I'm not entirely sure that is what we saw.
No,
I thought she was male-born initially.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that right? Because the character she plays is absolutely neutral, isn't it?
Well, I always thought it was a bit of bad taste that the first trans actor to be in Doctor Who played this weird, what they call the grunt, I think.
Well, that's why I'm confused about it, clearly, right?
It was just this weird sort of non-binary, but not in a positive way. I always thought that was, even at the time, it felt a little bit distasteful.
Bethany Black.
Bethany
Black,
yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Then so that's just another example of the same thing, really. So we still haven't, insofar as I can remember. So that's not great representation. I think you've got to try and strike a balance. Anyway, the other thing that the one last thing I'll bring up, unless anybody's got more they want to. I mean, you talk about the spin-off if you want. I was going to say talking about the spin-off until we actually know anything about it.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll save that for another time. The one last thing I was going to bring up, there's been a lot of talk about Disney giving notes, but I noticed that Disney's notes were only given post-production. Do you know what I mean? They made the episode, and then Disney gave notes on the episode after it was finished, and they put something extra in at that point. But by the sound of it, Disney didn't give notes on the script.
I mean, I think these things have a habit of evolving from the moment they've been written to what they actually turn into on the floor. And like, people give the execs, everybody who's financing, the people on board, everybody will give their notes. They may not always be taken on board. They may be pushed back on. Like, one of the big jobs of the producers will be to sort of, if they feel a note is justified, to put it onto Russell. If they don't feel a note is justified, to push back on it with the financiers. And it wouldn't be the first time that somebody's signed off on a script and then they've shot it, and you suddenly go, oh, this bit isn't quite working, or actually we could do this sooner. But the bottom line is, there will be lots of people from the BBC, from Bad Wolf, from Disney, and who knows, maybe even Sony somewhere as well, giving notes on these things at all levels of it. And you do it when you get the script, when you get the brushes, when you get the edit, until you are picture locked. It's a malleable thing, and they obviously felt the episode really needed that, and it did. So, like,
I mean, you're telling me that all these people looked at all the last 4 scripts and not one of them pointed out that between 4 hours of television, Russell T Davies hadn't come up with a single fucking story? I was tempted to say something serious there, but I just couldn't be bothered.
It would be a first for the podcast.
But you know what I mean? I think the thinking has been that Disney are in from the ground up, but the only actual evidence we've got is of something that happened post-production. So I'm just saying that's an interesting aspect to the picture that nobody had really picked up on.
You've got to remember, those execs will be over 7, 8 other shows, plus loads of other internal politics. So that, by its very nature, those exec roles are very hands-off. But also, they've all got to. There's also this thing of, sometimes you get given something to give notes on, and you're like, actually, this is fine. So you end up just giving random notes of just going, oh, have you thought about doing that? Have you thought about doing that? So these notes won't always be taken on board, but they're not. I don't think they'll be as hands-on as people think they are. They're just. Well,
that's it. That's what I'm saying. There's this great impression that the Disney are now in charge of Doctor Who, and I'm just saying the only evidence we've got of Disney doing anything is them saying, once the episode's finished, oh, would have been nice if this had happened, and Russell T Davies saying, oh yeah, we can fit that in.
Bad Wolf and Russell T Davies are in charge of Doctor Who, and then there's countless other execs. The idea that they're somehow guiding the narrative in any way, shape, or form, they will have certain policies as a company in terms of, like, there's the thing called compliance. If you can do that, you can't do that. This is how you represent this type of person. This is how you show this sort of product, even down to, you know, the designer label on the clothes. But that's all very basic stuff.
It comes back to what I said about, if Disney were in charge of telling Russell what to write, there's no way their first 3 episodes would have been the 10th Doctor coming back into the body of the recently regenerated female Doctor for 3 episodes, and then you know, they're clearly they've seen what Russell T Davies did with Doctor Who last time. They've said, yeah, sure, we'll chuck you some money to make a couple more years of that, you know.
Just as long as you don't go abroad to film anything.
Exactly. But that, again, that's another one of Russell's particular blinkers, I think. He just sets... I can't think of a story he wrote that wasn't set in either an urban environment or a futuristic analogue for an urban environment. He just does what he does all the time, week in, week out.
Yeah, this is why I'm dreading the spin-off, because I think it's probably going to be just more of the same. When there was a real opportunity to take the spin-offs and do something very different. I'd love to see, but
I think it'll be better than the actual series we get of Doctor Who. That's my feeling, because it won't be an anthology show. It will be given to a writer who has 5 or 6 weeks to develop a bunch of characters and do something interesting with them.
As long as that writer's not Russell T Davies. I have this horrible fear he's going to write the first episode and tell people what to write afterwards.
He'll write 1 episode and give it to Chris Chibnall.
It's a recipe for success.
It worked for Torchwood. Right. On that note, unless anybody's got anything more they want to bring up, any other things that I've not brought up? No.
Let's just say the new targets are out as well, and the giggle is fantastic. Well worth it. I don't want to spoil it for anyone.
What? So
I mean,
is it different to the?
It captures the spirit of the episode, but in literary form. It has a lot of fun novelizing it.
Is that the James Goss one?
It's the James Goss one. James Goss is always very good with like playing with the nature of the story.
Is the one who did all
way.
the Douglas Adams adaptations,
Yes.
isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There you
Very, very much worth your while picking it up if you're listening or watching.
Right. On that more positive note, then, until we do this again, I was JR.
I was Matt.
I was Dylan.
I was Ian.
And I was John.
And we will speak again soon.